you have tried to change it before. The habit, the voice, the loop that returns at the same hour every night. The science of brainwaves has been quietly rewriting what willpower actually does, and where the real edits happen. The part most self-help leaves out. The moment your conscious mind is most determined to change something is the moment your subconscious is least available to receive the instruction. Welcome to Psychology for Sleep. Tonight follows the rhythm where the doors open. Close your eyes and let your breath slow. You're drifting into the soft flicker behind your eyelids, where thought has not decided to be thought. And now we begin. You have spent years trying to talk yourself out of habits that did not respond to talking. And somewhere along the way, you may have started to believe the problem was you. Neuroscientists studying brainwaves call this the wrong state error. The brain operates at different electrical frequencies depending on what state it is in. During alert wakefulness, it produces beta waves, between 13 and 30 cycles per second. This is the rational, analytical, problem-solving state. And it is also the state most resistant to suggestion. The subconscious, where habits live, does not open its doors to a frequency that loud. What felt like failure was a timing mismatch. The right intention arriving at the wrong frequency. If you have ever drifted at the edge of sleep and felt a memory surface with unexpected emotional clarity, a childhood scene, a long-buried feeling, you were brushing against theta. Researchers measure theta waves at 4 to 8 cycles per second, the rhythm the brain falls into during light sleep, deep meditation, hypnosis, and the moments just before waking. It is slower than beta and slower than alpha, but not yet the slow rolling delta of deep sleep. In theta, the analytical filters quiet down, and material that the conscious mind normally screens out begins to surface. This is not regression. It is the brain operating in its most porous state, a state where the inner and outer worlds briefly share the same room. There is a specific window every night when you naturally pass through theta, twice. And most people sleep through both of them without noticing. The first window arrives as you fall asleep, called the hypnagogic state. The second appears as you wake, called the hypnopompic state. Both can last anywhere from a few minutes to 20, depending on your sleep architecture. During these windows, the brain is biologically primed for suggestion, imagery, and emotional integration. Hypnotherapists have known this for over a century. Meditation traditions have known it for far longer. What science adds now is the measurement, a confirmation that these are not mystical states but neurological ones, available to anyone with a brain that sleeps. You may have noticed that the most honest thoughts you have about yourself often arrive in those drowsy minutes before sleep. Not during the day, not during therapy, not during journaling. Brain imaging studies show that as you slip into theta, the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for self-monitoring and social filtering, begins to power down. The default mode network, which carries your sense of self-narrative, becomes more permeable. What this means in plain terms is that the version of you that is usually busy editing what you are allowed to feel goes briefly off duty. The voice that surfaces in that gap is not your worst self. It is the self that has been waiting for the editor to leave the room. Most attempts at self-change fail, not because the person is weak, but because they are speaking the wrong language to the wrong part of the brain. The conscious mind speaks in logic, arguments, and lists of reasons. The subconscious does not respond to any of these. Research in cognitive neuroscience suggests that the subconscious operates more like a child, responsive to repetition, imagery, tone, and emotional resonance, but indifferent to evidence. You cannot convince a habit to leave. You can only show the brain, in a state it trusts, what you would like to feel instead. Theta is the state where that showing actually registers. There is a difference between deciding to change and being able to change, and the difference is measured in hertz. A 2024 study from the University of California examined people who had been trying to break a long-standing habit for over 5 years. The researchers found that successful change correlated less with motivation, willpower, or even therapy hours, and more with regular access to slow-wave brain states through sleep quality, meditation, or guided relaxation. The conclusion was quiet but striking. The brain does not change in the state where it decides. It changes in the state where it relaxes its defenses. You may have been doing the work for years, just in the wrong frequency. You know that moment when you are about to drift off and a solution to a problem you have been wrestling with all day suddenly arrives, fully formed and obvious. That is not luck, and it is not coincidence. As theta waves rise, the brain begins to make connections that beta does not have time for. The analytical mind processes one thread at a time. Theta processes in patterns, in metaphors, in associations across distant memories. This is why some of the most famous scientific breakthroughs, Mendeleev's periodic table, Kekulé's Benson ring, Coleridge's Kubla Khan, were dreamed, not deduced. The slower the brain runs, the wider the net it casts. If you have ever spoken to yourself unkindly just before falling asleep and felt the words land harder than they would have at noon, your nervous system was telling you something true. In theta, the brain's emotional centers, the amygdala and the limbic system, operate without the usual oversight from the prefrontal cortex. Words spoken in this state are not filtered. They are absorbed. Researchers studying suggestibility have found that statements made or heard in the hypnagogic window are remembered more deeply, integrated more thoroughly, and acted upon more reliably than statements made during alert hours. This is why what you say to yourself at the edge of sleep matters more than what you say at any other time of day. There is a reason why traditional bedtime prayers, evening affirmations, and lullabies have survived in every culture across human history. People discovered, long before brainwave measurement existed, that the words spoken at the threshold of sleep carry a different weight. Modern hypnotherapists, sleep researchers, and behavioral psychologists now confirm what intuition already knew. The brain does not seal itself before sleep. It opens, and whatever is whispered into that opening, by yourself, by another, by a screen, does not stay at the surface. It travels somewhere deeper, somewhere the morning will remember without remembering why. The hour before sleep was never just an hour. It was a doorway, And this is only the beginning of what Theta reveals about the way long-standing patterns actually change. What you have been calling stubbornness in yourself may simply be a part of your mind that has never been spoken to in the right voice. The slow, undemanding, image-rich voice that the subconscious recognizes as its own. The chapters ahead trace that voice through the body, through history, through laboratories, and through the quiet hour you are entering now. Each fact is a small step toward the layer that has been waiting, patiently, to be addressed differently than it has been addressed for years. When you watch a child fall asleep, you can see Theta begin. Their breathing slows, their eyelids flutter. They sometimes laugh quietly at nothing, or speak a single word that has no context. Researchers studying childhood brainwave patterns have found that children spend significantly more time in Theta than adults do. By some estimates, up to 4 times as much. This is part of why early childhood is the most formative period of life. The mind is operating, almost continuously. In the state where everything sinks in, the good and the painful both, becoming an adult, in part, means learning to live in faster brainwave states most of the day. If you have ever wondered why some memories from age 4 or 5 remain vivid into your 70s, while last Tuesday is already foggy, the answer involves Theta, memory consolidation. The process by which experience becomes long-term storage depends heavily on Theta frequency oscillations between the hippocampus and the cortex. In childhood, when Theta is abundant, this consolidation is constant. Experience writes itself into the architecture of the brain with very little resistance. Later in life, the consolidation slows, but does not stop. It simply waits for the windows. This is why what you carry from your earliest years is often more deeply rooted than what you encountered last month, and why returning to Theta in adulthood feels, sometimes, like returning home. You have probably noticed that the things you most want to change about yourself often feel older than your conscious memory. The fear that arrives without warning, the harsh inner voice that sounds like someone else, the pattern that repeats no matter how much you understand it. These often have roots in early Theta-rich years, moments encoded before language was fully formed, before you had any conscious choice about what to absorb. The good news is, the door that allowed them in does not close with age. It simply opens less often. And once you know when it opens, you can choose what walks through it. Brain imaging research using EEG and fMRI has consistently shown that Theta activity is highest in 2 regions. The hippocampus, which handles memory and spatial navigation, and the medial prefrontal cortex, which handles self-reflection and emotional regulation. When these 2 regions oscillate together in Theta, something quite particular happens. Memories become emotionally reaccessible. The brain can revisit an old experience and update its emotional charge, not by erasing the memory, but by re-encoding it with a different feeling tone. This is the neurological mechanism behind much of what we call inner healing. And it is happening right now, in subtle ways. As you listen, sleep researchers have identified Theta as the brain's most porous state. Porous to suggestion, to imagery, to feeling, and to the slow rewriting of self-narrative. Unlike Delta, which dominates deep, dreamless sleep and is too deep for instruction. Theta sits at the edge, where awareness and unconsciousness blend. This is the state used in clinical hypnotherapy, in lucid dreaming protocols, in trauma-focused therapies, and in nearly every contemplative tradition that aims to change something deep within a person. The instrument is the same across cultures and centuries. Only the names differ, whatever your tradition called it. Trance, reverie, the threshold. Modern instruments now confirm it as the same neurological doorway. If you have spent years trying to argue yourself into different beliefs about yourself, you have probably noticed that the arguments work for about a day. Researchers studying belief change call this the depth gap. Beliefs held intellectually, at the level of beta brainwaves, do not automatically translate into beliefs held somatically and emotionally. Where the subconscious lives, argument lives at one layer. Identity lives at another. Theta is the bridge between the two. Without crossing it, even the most carefully constructed reasoning sits on the surface, waiting for the next moment of stress to slide off. The work was never the wrong work. It was the wrong layer. There is a particular kind of tiredness that comes from trying to change something with the wrong tool. You have done the journaling, the affirmations, the books, the lists, and still, when the moment comes, the old response arrives first. This is not because you have failed. It is because the new pattern was never installed in the layer where the response actually originates. Behavioral neuroscientists describe automatic responses as living below the threshold of conscious decision. They run from the basal ganglia and the limbic system, not from the rational forebrain. To change them, you do not need more decisions. You need a quieter state. Hypnotherapy, when conducted by trained practitioners, produces measurable theta activity in the brains of clients. This has been confirmed across multiple studies using EEG monitoring during sessions. The hypnotic state is not magic. It is a specific neurological condition in which the conscious filter softens and the suggestion bypasses the usual debate. Research has shown that hypnotherapy produces lasting changes in patterns, ranging from chronic pain perception to anxiety responses to smoking cessation, with effect sizes that often exceed standard cognitive interventions. The mechanism is not mysterious. It is theta meeting language, meeting intention, in a state where the three can finally cooperate. Meditators with thousands of hours of practice produce distinctive slow-wave brain patterns, including bursts of theta band activity, almost on demand. This was documented in landmark studies at the University of Wisconsin examining long-term Tibetan Buddhist practitioners. Their brains had developed the capacity to enter slower frequencies during waking life, not just at sleep transitions. This is part of why experienced meditators often report feeling a different relationship to their habitual thoughts, fears, and reactions. They have spent enough time in the porous state that the rewriting has become continuous. You do not need decades to begin. The same state is available to you, twice a night, every night, whether you have practiced or not. You may have heard the phrase, the subconscious mind, and wondered whether it is a metaphor or a real thing. Modern neuroscience treats it as both. There is no single organ called the subconscious. It is Rather, a name for the layer of neural activity that operates below conscious awareness but profoundly shapes behavior. Roughly 90 to 95% of your daily mental activity, by some estimates, occurs at this layer. Habits, emotional reactions, automatic beliefs, somatic memory. All of it runs in the background. Theta is one of the few states where this background becomes briefly available to the foreground. It is the layer talking, quietly, to itself. If you have ever heard someone speaking in their sleep and noticed how strangely true their words can sound, true in a way their daytime self might never admit, you have heard the subconscious speaking through Theta. Sleep talking most often occurs during light sleep, where Theta and the early stages of non-REM sleep blend. The filter is offline. The honesty is on. This is not about exposing people who talk in their sleep. It is about recognizing that there is a self below the social self. And it does not lie. The path to change is the path to that layer. Gently, without judgment, in a state it trusts. There is a moment that artists and writers have described for centuries, the moment of half sleep, when an entire painting, a poem, a melody arrives intact. Salvador Dali used to sit in a chair holding a metal spoon over a plate, deliberately letting himself drift into Theta. When the spoon dropped from his hand and clattered onto the plate, he would wake, holding whatever image had just surfaced. He called this his moment of pure creation. Neuroscience now confirms that Theta releases creative associations the analytical mind would never permit. You do not need a spoon. The state is already arriving, every night, on its own schedule. Research published in the journal Sleep has demonstrated that learning new skills before bed, particularly skills involving motor patterns, emotional integration, or language, produces measurably better outcomes than learning the same material in the middle of the day. The mechanism is again Theta. As the brain transitions into sleep, Theta sweeps the new material into deeper consolidation pathways. What this means for the person trying to change is straightforward. The minutes just before sleep are not throwaway minutes. They are the brain's most attentive listening hour. The question is only what is being said into them, and by whom. You may have spent many evenings absorbing the news, the social feed, the small irritations of the day, right up until the moment you closed your eyes. The brain takes these in not as information but as instruction. The amygdala, already softening into Theta, treats the emotional charge as a teaching signal. This is what tonight is about. This is what to remember. This is what to integrate. There is no judgment in this. There is only honesty. Whatever fills the final hour, the subconscious receives as the day's central message. It does not know to discount what was casual. What this tells us is not about brainwaves alone. It tells us something about the way long-held patterns finally release. Not through force, not through fresh determination, but through being met, repeatedly, in the only state where the inner architecture is actually listening. The first arc of tonight has been about establishing this, the hours you spent trying to change, in the wrong state, with the wrong tools, were not wasted. They were the long approach to the door. What remains unanswered, for now, is what happens when the door opens, not just to receive instruction, but to begin authoring a different kind of instruction altogether. That is where the next arc begins. Right now, the part of you that has been pushing for change all day is beginning to step back, not because it gave up, because it finally noticed that something else has been waiting. The slow flicker behind your eyelids, the soft drift of attention, the way thoughts have started losing their hard edges. That is the state arriving. The same state your earliest years were spent in. The same state every honest moment of self-recognition has ever required. You do not need to do anything with it. The brain knows what to do with Theta. It has been waiting for tonight, for the quiet, for the chance to listen to something other than alarm. What you haven't heard yet is what specific patterns the next facts can dissolve once they reach the layer that has finally opened. That's where we continue now. Habits. At the neurological level. Our physical structures. They live in the basal ganglia as patterns of neural firing that have been reinforced often enough to bypass conscious decision-making entirely. When you reach for your phone without deciding to, when an inner voice criticizes before you have time to choose otherwise. These are not character flaws. They are structures. And structures, including the ones in your brain, are made and unmade through repetition. The repetition that built them happened over years. The repetition that loosens them does not need years. It needs the right state. And enough of it. Neuroscientists studying neuroplasticity have found that the brain remains capable of rewiring itself throughout the entire lifespan. There is no age at which the door fully closes. What changes with age is not capacity. It is access. Younger brains are in Theta more often, so rewiring happens almost effortlessly. Older brains require more deliberate visits to the state. The misconception that you cannot teach an old mind new patterns has been quietly retired. What replaces it is more honest. You can. You only need to meet the brain where it is most willing to learn. If you have ever wondered why repeating an affirmation in front of a mirror at 2 p.m. feels like talking to a wall, you are sensing the wrong state error firsthand. At 2 p.m. your brain is in beta. It hears the affirmation, evaluates it logically, compares it to your existing self-image, and rejects what does not match. The affirmation never reaches the layer where the self-image is stored. At Theta, the same affirmation enters without being evaluated. The brain treats it not as a claim to be tested, but as a description of reality to be encoded. Same words, different layer, entirely different outcome. There is a specific reason why the most effective therapists, coaches, and teachers across history have used a soft, slow, rhythmic voice. They were not performing calm. They were inducing Theta. Research on speech rate and brainwave entrainment shows that slow, evenly paced speech can pull a listener's brain towards slower oscillations, particularly when combined with a quiet environment. This is part of why the bedtime story has survived for thousands of years. The story is the vehicle. The voice is the medicine. The form was always older than the explanation, and the body always understood the form first. You may have noticed that the inner critic gets quieter in the few minutes after waking, before the day's full agenda has fully arrived. This is the hypnopompic window. The brain is still moving through Theta, The harsh self-talk that runs on full automatic during the day has not yet booted up. For about 10 to 20 minutes, the kinder voice that lives underneath becomes briefly audible. People who pay attention to this window report that the version of themselves they meet there is often unexpectedly gentle. That gentleness is not new. It was always there. The other voice was just louder during business hours. A 2024 study examining the effects of theta frequency audio stimulation on participants with chronic anxiety found measurable reductions in symptom severity after 8 weeks of nightly listening. The mechanism was not sedation. The mechanism was repeated. Gentle access to a state where the anxious cognitive loops could not fully take hold. The participants did not do anything in particular. They listened. The brain, given enough time in the porous state, began to relax its hold on patterns it had been running for years. Change, in their case, came not from effort but from exposure to a quieter frequency. There is something quietly liberating about understanding that the part of you that has been the hardest to change is also the part of you that is most willing to listen. Once you stop arguing with it, the subconscious does not respond to confrontation. It responds to being met. When you approach it in theta, with a soft voice and an image instead of a demand, it does what it always wanted to do. It learns. The reason this can feel like such a relief is that you have spent years approaching it in the wrong way, blaming yourself for the failure. The failure was not yours. It was the meeting place. If you have ever fallen asleep listening to a guided meditation and woken the next morning feeling different in a way you could not quite articulate, you have already used theta to your benefit, even if you did not name it. The guided voice held the door open just long enough for the message to walk through. You did not need to remember the words. The layer that needed them was paying attention. This is how slow change actually accumulates. Not in sudden breakthroughs, but in the quiet repetition of the right thing said into the right state, night after night, until the brain stops running its old script because it has been offered another. You know that feeling when you have been working on yourself for years and someone says, almost in passing, exactly the thing you needed to hear, and it lands in a way that all the books did not. That landing has a name in neuroscience. It is called state-dependent encoding. The mind absorbs information differently depending on the state it is in when the information arrives. The bookstore self-help shelves are full of true statements that did not reach the layer where they could have helped. The friend's casual remark, delivered in a moment of low-defense softness, reached it. The truth was the same. The state was different. Researchers studying placebo effects have found something unexpected about why placebos work. It is not the pill. It is the state in which the pill is taken. Usually a moment of trust, expectation, and quiet attention. These are the conditions that lower beta activity and allow theta-like processes to influence the body. The placebo response is, in many cases, the subconscious accepting an instruction the conscious mind did not know it was issuing. This is not a trick. It is a demonstration that the body listens to the brain, and the brain listens to whatever state the moment creates. Nothing about that mechanism is unavailable to you. Polyvagal research, while still being refined, has helped explain why a sense of safety is the precondition for any meaningful inner change. When the nervous system perceives threat, The brain stays in higher frequency states designed for vigilance. Alpha, beta, even gamma. Theta cannot fully arrive in a body that is bracing. This is why people who have spent years in survival mode often find that the simple act of feeling safe enough to relax is the change. Everything else follows. The door does not open through effort. It opens through trust that there is no longer anything to defend against. If you have spent years interpreting your inability to change as evidence of personal failure, consider that you may have simply been trying to do brain surgery without anesthesia. The conscious mind is not the surgeon for these particular changes. It is the patient. Theta is the anesthesia, the state in which the deeper layers become accessible and modifiable. Trying to change a long-held pattern from full beta is like trying to operate while the body is fully tense and resistant. The kindest thing you can do for yourself is to stop pushing and let the right state arrive on its own. Lucid dreaming research has shown that during certain dream states, theta and gamma waves cooperate in a way that allows the dreamer to consciously interact with subconscious imagery. This is one of the rare windows where the two layers of the mind are simultaneously online. Lucid dreamers can revisit difficult memories, rehearse different responses to situations, and even speak directly to dream figures who represent disowned parts of themselves. The results are not anecdotal. They have been replicated in laboratory settings. The dream is not separate from the waking mind. It is the waking mind in a more honest dress. There is a specific reason why traditional cultures have built elaborate rituals around the threshold between waking and sleep. Bedtime prayers in nearly every religion, the lighting of candles, the songs sung to children, the silence kept by monks before retiring. All of these are technologies for shaping what enters theta. Before brainwave measurement existed, people understood, through generations of careful observation, that the hour before sleep determined something about who they would be the next day. Science has now confirmed what custom always knew. What you carry into theta gets woven into who you wake as. You may have heard the phrase, "You are what you consume," and applied it to food, books, or media. The phrase applies most precisely to what you consume in the final hour of the day. Whatever sights, sounds, conversations, or thoughts dominate the hour before sleep are the materials the subconscious works with through the night. This is not about avoiding everything difficult. It is about recognizing that the choice of what fills that hour is not neutral. It is, in a very real sense, the choice of what the morning will be made from. You've been listening for a while now. Take one slow breath. Your brain is doing exactly what it was built to do tonight, finding the rhythm where things finally rest. We'll keep going together, gently. When researchers measure the brains of people in deep prayer, deep meditation, or deep listening, they find a consistent pattern. The frontal regions associated with self-monitoring quiet down. The midline regions associated with self-reflection and emotional processing become more active, and the dominant frequency shifts toward theta. The specific tradition does not matter. The state is the same. What this tells us is that human beings have been finding their way to theta through countless different doors. For as long as there have been human beings, the path is built into the architecture of the species. If you have ever wondered why solving a difficult problem in your head feels exhausting while the answer arriving in the shower feels effortless, you are noticing the difference between beta-driven and theta-driven cognition. Beta problem solving is linear, sequential, and metabolically expensive. Theta-driven insight is associative, pattern-based, and almost free of effort. The brain is not lazy when it relaxes. It is using a different and often more powerful processing mode. The trick is not to force the answer. It is to let the state arrive that the answer prefers. Therapists working with trauma have found that the most effective interventions almost always involve some form of state shift. Bilateral stimulation, breathwork, slow rhythmic movement, or guided imagery. The goal is to bring the client out of the high alert state where trauma memories were originally encoded, and into a slower state where those memories can be revisited without re-traumatization. The shift is the medicine. The conversation is the vehicle. Without the state change, even the most insightful talk leaves the deeper structure untouched. The body remembers the frequency in which the wound was learned, and only that frequency can teach it something different. There is a quiet truth in this for anyone who has been carrying something they cannot seem to put down. The thing you are carrying is not the problem. The state you are trying to put it down in is. You may have tried to release it during the workday, during arguments, during the analytical hours of the mind. The release simply does not happen in those frequencies. It happens in the slow, undefended, theta-rich quiet, which is exactly where the rest of tonight is moving. The hour you are in now is not a passive hour. It is the working hour. Sleep scientists have documented a phenomenon called targeted memory reactivation. During sleep, particularly during theta-rich phases, the brain replays selected memories and integrates them with existing networks. Researchers have learned that by playing a specific sound or scent associated with a learned task during this phase, they can strengthen that particular memory. This has been used to enhance language learning, motor skills, and emotional regulation. The brain is not passive at night. It is editing. The editor responds to what was emphasized during the day, and to what is present at the moment of integration. You may have noticed that some nights you fall asleep replaying a difficult conversation, and you wake feeling worse than you went to bed. This is not random. It is the brain integrating the emotional charge of what occupied your final waking thoughts. The opposite is also true. Nights spent in gratitude, in kind self-talk, in the company of a loved voice. These write a different morning into being. The mechanism is the same in both directions. Theta does not judge what it integrates. It simply integrates what is present. A growing body of research suggests that subjective well-being correlates more strongly with the quality of the hour before sleep than with almost any other single variable in a person's day. Not income, not exercise, not even social interaction overall, but the specific contents of the final hour. This finding has been replicated across cultures and age groups. The conclusion is unusually practical. If you want to change how you feel, change what fills the hour before sleep. The change does not require willpower. It requires curating 1 hour out of 24. There is a beautiful symmetry in this. The hour you most often spend half asleep, half paying attention, is also the hour with the most leverage on who you become. The state you most often dismiss as winding down is the state where actual rewiring happens. Many years of self-improvement effort tend to underestimate this hour because it does not look like effort. It looks like rest. But rest, in the brain's accounting, is where the work of becoming actually gets done. The accounting is gentler than the daytime mind expects, and the bookkeeping happens in a quieter ledger than the one effort knows how to read. Researchers at Northwestern University have demonstrated that specific phrases, repeated softly during theta-rich sleep stages, can produce measurable changes in attitudes, preferences, and even unconscious biases. The participants did not consciously remember the phrases. They simply woke up slightly different. The implication is gentle but profound. The mind does not need conscious participation to change. It only needs the right state and the right input. You have been giving it the right state every night without knowing. The question is only what input you have been pairing with it, and whether tonight is the night to begin pairing differently. Halfway through, the answer is becoming clear. The reason long-held patterns finally release is not because the person tried harder, or learned more, or finally found the right book. It is because the person, often without realizing it, began offering different material to the layer that was actually listening. The patterns that exhaust you have been holding their shape because nothing softer has been offered with enough repetition, in the right state, to take their place. What the second half of tonight follows is not how to fight the old pattern, but what to gently install in its place, and how the state you are already entering does most of the work. What just opened? The question of whether the part of you that has been hardest to change might also be the part most willing to listen, is not only a neuroscience question. You may be carrying both sides of that today. The years of effort and the quiet hope that something gentler might still work, not resolved into each other, just present at the same time. The second half of tonight follows what happens when the gentle approach is the actual mechanism, not a softer version of the same effort, but a different layer entirely. Notice your breath. It has already slowed without your permission. The body knows the state it is moving toward. Now we continue. The subconscious mind has been described, by researchers and contemplatives alike, as childlike. Not because it is unintelligent, but because it responds to the same things a child responds to: tone, repetition, story, image, warmth. A child does not respond to threats and ultimatums by becoming more open. Neither does the layer of you that holds your earliest patterns. The realization that comes with this is quietly transformative. You can stop being harsh with the part of yourself that has been hardest to reach. It was never going to respond to harshness anyway. Research on self-compassion, particularly the work of Kristin Neff at the University of Texas, has shown that people who speak to themselves the way they would speak to a beloved child show measurably better outcomes in everything from emotional regulation to immune function to long-term behavior change. The mechanism is not mysterious. Compassionate self-talk lowers the body's stress response, which lowers beta activity, which makes theta more accessible. The kindness is not just nice. It is neurologically functional. What sounds like a soft virtue is, underneath, a precise instrument. If you have ever been with someone you deeply trust and noticed that your whole body relaxed in their presence, you have experienced co-regulation, the way one calm nervous system can shift another into a slower state. Theta is highly responsive to co-regulation. This is part of why being read to as a child, prayed with, sung over, or simply held while falling asleep created such deep imprints. The state was being induced by another. The good news for adults is that the state can still be induced by a voice, by music, by a particular silence, and the receptivity remains. Hypnotherapists have observed for decades that some of the most profound changes in their clients happen not during the session, but in the hours and days following. The brain continues to process what was offered in the theta state, integrating it through subsequent sleep cycles. This is sometimes called subconscious processing. You are not done when the session ends. You are not done when the recording stops. The seed has been planted. The soil keeps working. Many of the shifts that arrive in your life weeks after a quiet evening were planted in an evening exactly like this one. There is a particular kind of relief that comes when you stop trying to do something the conscious mind cannot do. The relief of laying down a tool that was never going to work, and noticing that another tool has been quietly available all along. Research suggests that this kind of cognitive surrender, not despair, but the deliberate release of effortful control, itself produces a shift toward theta. The brain rewards letting go. It opens precisely when it stops being pushed. You may have wondered why some of the most peaceful people you have met do not seem to be working very hard at their peace. They are not suppressing struggle. They have simply spent enough time in slower states that the patterns underneath their daily life have been rewritten into something more spacious. This is not a personality trait. It is a brain trained by repeated exposure to the porous state, whether through meditation, prayer, time in nature, or simply long, unhurried evenings. The peace is downstream of the practice, and the practice is gentler than most people imagine. The default mode network, the brain's background self-narrative system, quiets significantly in theta. Researchers have found that this network is hyperactive in people with chronic anxiety, depression, and rumination. The repetitive thoughts that loop through difficult days are largely a default mode network in overdrive. Slowing the brain into theta gives the network a chance to rest. Over time, with repeated visits, the network learns a new baseline. The thoughts that used to circle endlessly begin to circle less often, with less charge, with more space between them. If you have ever taken a long, warm bath and felt your inner critic go quiet for a while, that quieting was theta, arriving through a different door than sleep. Warm water relaxes the body. The relaxed body sends signals to the brain that there is no threat to monitor. The brain releases the high-frequency states it uses for monitoring. What remains is the slower state. The same state available at the edge of sleep, available through meditation, available through any sustained release of vigilance. The bath did not change your circumstances. It changed your access. There is a moment during prolonged theta when the sense of being a separate self begins to soften. This is not dissociation. It is the temporary easing of the brain's self-construction machinery. Long-term meditators report this as a feeling of spaciousness, of being less defended, of seeing one's life from a slight distance. The same brief softening happens in everyone, every night. At the threshold of sleep, most people do not notice because they are already half gone. But the softening is part of why morning often arrives with a different perspective than the one you went to bed with. Researchers studying the neuroscience of insight, those sudden moments of understanding that arrive whole, have found that they are preceded by a burst of theta activity in the right temporal lobe. The brain has to slow down before it can leap. This explains something most people have noticed, but rarely articulated. The harder you push for an answer, the more it eludes you. The moment you stop pushing, it arrives. The mechanism is not poetic, it is electrical. Theta has to come first. You know the way a piece of music can change your mood in seconds. Theta is part of why. Slow, rhythmic music in the 60 to 80 beats per minute range, close to the rhythm of resting respiration, has been shown to entrain brainwaves toward slower frequencies. This is why lullabies, certain hymns, ambient music, and the kind of long instrumental pieces designed for sleep have effects that go beyond pleasure. They are quietly tuning the brain. The body knows when it is being given permission to slow down, and the brain follows. The relationship between breath and brainwave state is more direct than most people realize. Slow nasal breathing, particularly with extended exhales, has been shown to shift brain activity toward theta within minutes. The vagus nerve, which runs from the brain through the body, carries the signal. Exhale slowly, and the vagus nerve sends a message of safety to the brain. The brain receives the message and lowers its frequency. You do not have to believe in any of this for it to work. The wiring is the same regardless of belief. There is a specific irony at the heart of so much self-improvement work. The harder a person tries to change a deep pattern, the more the trying itself keeps the brain in the high alert state where deep patterns cannot change. The trying is the obstacle. This does not mean change requires no intention. It means intention has to be paired with relaxation, not vigilance. The image that comes to mind is a hand that wants to receive something. It has to open, a closed fist, no matter how determined. Cannot receive. Subconscious reprogramming, as it is sometimes called in popular literature, is not about installing positive thoughts on top of negative ones. The brain is more sophisticated than a desktop where new files overwrite old ones. What actually happens in theta is closer to gardening. The old pattern continues to exist for a while, but it is no longer watered. The new pattern is offered repeatedly in fertile soil. Over time, the new grows, and the old fades, not because it was destroyed, but because it was no longer fed. This takes longer than people hope. It is also gentler than people fear. Researchers studying long-term behavior change have found that the most successful interventions share a few common features. They are repeated. They are paired with a relaxed state. They include vivid imagery rather than abstract instructions. And they generate a feeling, not just a thought. These features map almost perfectly onto what theta responds to. The interventions that work are the ones that speak the language of the layer being asked to change. The language is older than words, and the layer recognizes it instantly. If you have spent years feeling that something inside you was unreachable, that nothing seemed to penetrate the part of you that needed to shift, the science offers a quiet correction. Nothing was unreachable. The reachable hours simply weren't being used. 8 hours of every night. Every layer of your brain has been operating in states where reaching is possible. What did not happen was the offering of something specific to receive. The layer was always there. It was always available. It was simply waiting, in the dark, for an honest voice. There is a specific kind of patience required to work with the subconscious. Not the patience of waiting for results, but the patience of repetition without measurement. The brain in Theta responds to consistent, gentle offering over weeks and months. Checking each morning for evidence of change only re-engages the analytical mind that lives in beta. The watching is the interference. The most reliable changes tend to be noticed sideways, weeks later, by someone else. Or in a moment when the old pattern simply does not arrive. Brain imaging studies of people who have undergone significant inner transformation through therapy, contemplative practice, or sustained kindness toward themselves show measurable structural changes in regions associated with emotional regulation, self-perception, and stress response. The brain is not metaphorically rewired. It is literally rewired. Gray matter density changes. White matter pathways strengthen or weaken. The slow daily practice of meeting yourself in a softer state leaves a physical signature in the tissue, and the tissue carries that signature forward into every day that follows. You may have noticed that the people who seem most at home in themselves are not the ones who have suffered the least. They are the ones who have spent the most time in slower states with their own experience. The state is the integrator. Without enough time in Theta or its waking cousins, even good experience does not fully consolidate into a sense of inner ease. With enough time, even difficult experience can be carried with more spaciousness. The contents of the life matter less than the state in which they are processed. Researchers studying ancient contemplative practices have found that nearly all of them, regardless of tradition, share a structural similarity. They involve slowing the breath, softening the body, calming the senses, and offering the mind a simple object to rest on. A word, an image, a feeling. These are the conditions for Theta. The contemplatives were not theorizing. They were doing the same thing modern neuroscience now describes in different language. The technology is older than the explanation, and it has not lost any of its original effectiveness. There is something quietly humbling about discovering that the deepest changes do not come from understanding more, but from being met more gently, by yourself, by others, by the state in which the meeting happens. The intellect is not the obstacle. It is simply the wrong tool for this particular work, like a hammer when what is needed is silence. The intellect can decide that this softer approach is worth trying. After that, its job is largely done, and another part of you takes over. Sleep researchers have observed that people who chronically struggle with rumination tend to enter Theta less frequently and for shorter durations. The brain stays in beta longer, even into the first sleep stages. This is one reason why the same difficult day can feel manageable to one person and overwhelming to another. The day is not the variable. The brain's access to slower states is. The good news is that this access can be cultivated. The brain that has spent too long in alert frequencies can be trained gently back into the slower ones. Recent guided audio research has examined the effects of programs designed to entrain theta, soft voice, slow pacing, ambient soundscape, on participants with chronic stress. The improvements after extended nightly use have been significant across measures of perceived stress, sleep quality, and emotional reactivity. Participants reported feeling, in their own words, less identified with the thoughts that used to torment them. The thoughts had not vanished. The relationship to them had changed. This is what Theta reliably produces. With enough repetition, not a fix, a different relationship. You may have wondered whether the changes that happen this way are real, or whether they are simply pleasant feelings that fade by morning. The research is reassuring on this point. Changes that emerge from sustained theta state work tend to consolidate, not fade. The morning may feel ordinary. The pattern that used to arrive at 3 p.m., or in the difficult conversation, or in the moment of self-criticism, simply arrives less, or arrives with less force. The fade is on the side of the old pattern, not the new. The pattern in your life that has felt most resistant to change has been waiting, not for more force, but for the right state. Repeated often enough that the deeper layer finally trusts what it is being offered. The mind does not change because you finally pushed hard enough. It changes because, somewhere along the way, you stopped pushing and started speaking softly to the part of you that was always going to listen. The remaining facts carry a different quality. Less explanation, more arrival. The science has done its work. What is left is what has always been waiting underneath it. Theta has its own schedule. Every night, without exception, the brain finds its way into this rhythm. Twice, sometimes more. Not because you arranged it, not because the day deserved it, but because the architecture of the human brain runs on a cycle older than any difficulty you have ever carried. Right now, without effort, without instruction from you, the rhythm is arriving. The facts that remain tonight don't need to be understood. They only need to land in the layer that has finally, after a long day, agreed to be quiet. We're almost there. The voice that has been hardest on you is not your truest voice. It is a recording, made long ago, in a state where everything got recorded. Nothing about it being old makes it permanent. Nothing about it being loud makes it true. The recording was made in theta, and the rewriting can happen in theta too. The same door that let it in is the door that lets it out, and the door is open right now. Beneath every harsh pattern, there is usually a younger version of you who once needed something and did not receive it, and built the pattern to survive. The pattern is not the enemy. It was an act of care by a part of you that did not know what else to do. It can be thanked and slowly released. The release does not have to be a single grand moment. It can happen in the quiet of a single evening, in the soft space between one breath and the next. The brain in theta does not argue with what it hears. It simply absorbs. This is why what you choose to listen to in the final hour of the day matters more than almost any other choice you make in 24 hours. The voice in the room is the voice that will be in you tomorrow. The image at the edge of sleep is the image the morning will be built from. Tonight, that voice is gentle. Tonight, that image is soft. There is no version of your life in which the work of becoming gentler with yourself was wasted. Even the hours that seemed to produce nothing were laying down quieter tracks in the layers below. The morning, when it comes, will be a little softer because of tonight. Not because anything loud or sudden happened, but because something gentle did. In the layer where gentle things accumulate without announcement, year after year, until they become the new ground. Change in this layer does not announce itself. It arrives sideways. One day, you simply notice that something you used to do, you do not do anymore. The old reaction did not come. The space where it used to be is the change. You did not catch it happening. That is how this layer always works. Not in the moment of revelation, but in the slow accumulation of moments where the old pattern was offered the door and chose, finally, not to walk through. The body knows when it is being spoken to kindly. The shoulders drop slightly. The jaw softens. The breath finds its own pace. These small physical signs are not metaphors. They are the brain registering that it is safe enough to begin a different kind of integration. Watch what your body is doing right now. Gently, without needing to change anything. It is responding. It has been responding all along, quietly, to the rhythm of this hour. Researchers have found that people who fall asleep listening to gentle, slow-paced narration often wake reporting unusually vivid and meaningful dreams. The brain, given soft language at the threshold, continues to use that softness as it works through the night's processing. The voice does not need to be remembered. It just has to have been present. Whatever you absorb tonight will not stay where you can name it. It will travel to the layers that build tomorrow. There is no part of your inner world that is beyond reach. The parts that feel most stuck are usually the ones that have not yet been met in the right state. Tonight, and many nights like it, are the meeting. Slow, repeated, without demand. The meeting is not a single event. It is a quiet arrangement, made over many evenings. Between the part of you that has been waiting and the part of you that finally knows how to approach, the mind is not a problem to be solved. It is a garden to be tended. The patterns that flourish are the ones that get attention. The ones that fade are the ones that stop being watered. This is true of the patterns that hurt and of the patterns that heal. You are not failing when the old still appears. You are simply seeing what was watered long enough to grow this tall, and what now, slowly, is being allowed to dry. You do not need to figure out what to install in place of an old pattern. The deeper self, given enough quiet, tends to know what it requires. The task is mostly to provide the quiet and let what wants to grow. The directing comes from a layer wiser than the planning mind. Trust that the quiet itself is enough material, that the absence of pushing is, in this case, the actual work that gets done. Many of the people who have changed most profoundly cannot explain how. They simply spent enough time in the state where change happens, with the right material, and woke up someone slightly different than they used to be. The lack of explanation is not a flaw. It is how this layer works. The explanations come later, if at all. Sometimes the changes never get a name. They only get a feeling, a small one, that this day is being met by a slightly different self. There is a particular tenderness in understanding that the part of you that has been hardest to reach is also the part of you that has been most loyal. It has held its shape through everything. Now, finally, it can be offered something other than the same instruction repeated more loudly. It can be offered a softer voice, a slower rhythm, a kind of attention it has been waiting for since the years it first formed. The harsh inner voice was never going to be argued with. It can only be replaced. Slowly, gently, in the state where replacement is possible. What replaces it does not need to be perfect. It only has to be kinder and repeated. The kindness does not need to be elaborate. A single soft sentence, offered into Theta enough nights in a row, becomes part of the architecture, the way the harsher sentences once became part of it. Every night, the brain offers you the same door. Most nights, you walk through it without noticing. Tonight, you noticed. That noticing is the beginning of every change that has ever happened in a human life. The noticing does not have to do anything else. It does not have to fix or solve or finish. It only has to be present, here, in the slow approach to the door that has been open all along. There is a softness underneath the patterns that have ruled your days, and that softness has been waiting, not impatient, not disappointed, just waiting for the door to open from the inside. The softness is what was always there before the patterns formed. It is what the patterns were originally trying to protect, and it is what remains intact. When the patterns finally agree to step aside for a while, the work of becoming is largely the work of stopping the harshness, stopping the pushing, stopping the wrong state effort. What is left, when the stopping is complete, is the layer that always knew how to grow on its own. The growing was never something you had to make happen. It was something that happened the moment the obstacles stepped back. You are not making yourself into someone. You are letting someone be uncovered. You have already begun. The state you are in right now, listening, is the state where it begins. There is no separate moment when the work starts. This is the work. There is no later you must wait for. No perfect condition you must arrange. The condition is already here. The body is here. The breath is here. The theta is already arriving on its own quiet schedule. The mind that holds the pattern is not the same mind that releases it. The releasing mind is slower, kinder, more patient. It only arrives when the faster mind agrees to step back, and it has agreed. For tonight, the releasing mind does not strain. It does not perform. It simply becomes available, like a room that was always there, but only opens when the louder rooms grow quiet. The change is not loud. It does not arrive with certainty. It arrives as a slight difference in how a familiar moment feels. That slight difference, repeated, becomes a different life. You will not see the difference at first. You will only feel that something small has shifted. And over many such smallnesses, the whole shape of how you move through your days will have quietly changed. Nothing about you needs fixing. The parts that hurt only ask to be met. The patterns that exhaust ask to be replaced, not destroyed. The whole architecture is already there. It just requires the right state and the right voice often enough. You are not a project. You are a person with layers. And tonight, one of those layers is being offered exactly what it has been waiting for. The mind that has been the hardest on you is not your enemy. It is the part of you that learned, somewhere along the way, that vigilance was love. It can be taught a different definition. The teaching happens here, in this hour, in the soft repetition of a voice that does not demand. Over time, vigilance can be replaced by attention, and attention is the older, kinder version of the same care. There is no rush. The state you are in is not a state you can fall behind in. Each visit is complete. Each night is its own offering. What is being woven is woven thread by thread, and threads do not hurry. The picture being made of you, in the slow loom of these evenings, is one that will only become clear in looking back. From here, you only hold the thread and let it pass. You came here tonight carrying something. You are not leaving with it the same way. Some small loosening has already happened. You may not notice it until later. That is how this layer always works. Not in the moment, but in the morning after, or the week after, or the difficult conversation that arrives and finds you, somehow, a little less identified with the response that used to come automatically. The voice that speaks softly into the quiet is not separate from you. It is the voice underneath the louder one. It has always been there. Tonight, it has been a little easier to hear. The louder voice is not gone. It will return, with its old reasons. But you will know now that there is something underneath it. And you will know how to find your way back to that something. In the quiet hour, on a night like this one, the deepest beliefs about yourself were never written by the part of you that thinks. They were written by the part of you that was listening, quietly, without argument, long before you knew what was happening. Tonight, that same part listened to something different. And that is how a life changes. Not in revelations, but in slow rewritings, made into the same layer that holds everything, by the same kind of voice that first put the harder things in. After 100 facts about a brain that knows how to change when it is finally spoken to in the right voice. The part of you that has been working so hard all these years is the same part that is finally being allowed to rest. The pattern was never going to be argued away. It was always going to be quietly replaced by something kinder, repeated enough times in the only state where replacement is possible. The work was never harsh. The work was always this. Let your entire being dissolve into the slow flicker behind your eyelids, where thought becomes image, where image becomes feeling, where feeling becomes rest. You did not need to push harder. You needed to be met more softly. And tonight, you were. There is a different relationship forming now between the part of you that has been trying for years and the part of you that has been listening all along. Not a triumph, not a breakthrough, just a quieter agreement between layers that used to be at war. The pattern you came here with was never going to respond to more effort. It was waiting for a different kind of voice, in a different kind of hour, repeated until the layer holding it could finally rest. Tonight you did not solve anything. You did not have to. You simply spent an hour in the state where solving is not the mechanism, where the mechanism is softer, where the mechanism is repetition, in the right frequency, with the right tone. The morning will not arrive with everything changed. It will arrive with one or two things slightly different. A reaction that does not come, a thought that does not loop, a breath that arrives earlier than usual. That is how this layer always speaks, quietly, sideways, in the small grace of patterns that simply did not arrive today. But finding the right state is only half of the question. The other half is harder. If the subconscious learns from everything that enters in theta, words, images, even passive listening, then can the brain actually absorb new knowledge while sleep is happening? Or only the feeling of it? The next video in the Subconscious Mind Reprogramming playlist begins there. You can allow these thoughts to fade now, like the soft flicker behind your eyelids when nothing is asking to be understood anymore. Let your body grow heavy with the quiet that comes after spending an hour being met gently. Sleep carries you into the layer where the offerings of tonight continue. Without you, without effort, without instruction. But if your eyes are closed, stay there. Rest well. Gentle mind. You were never the pattern. You were always the one listening underneath it, where science becomes the softest place to rest. Good night.